One Tuesday morning, on a quiet street in suburban North Austin, a young family stood still in front of the house they used to call home. A red foreclosure notice was taped across the front door. No one spoke. Two kids were dozing in the back seat. The mother sat behind the wheel, holding a paper bag with the last few cartons of milk. The father, once a mechanical engineer with a steady job, just stared at the house, now a place they no longer had the right to enter. Their bank account had less than $40. Total debt? Over $67,000. No job, no home, no safety net. What happened? And more importantly, how did they pay off all their debt, buy a home with mostly cash, and rebuild their financial life in less than 3 years? If you're between 20 and 45, living in a world where student loans, rising rent, and unexpected bills are your daily reality, this story is for you because it's not a fairy tale. It's a real-life case study of how one American family rebuilt their financial future after bankruptcy with discipline, clarity, and a simple notebook. In the next 20 minutes, you'll see a journey not fueled by luck or miracles, but by small, consistent choices, the kind you can apply to your own life, starting today. But before we dive in, ask yourself this: are you in control of your money, or is your money controlling your life? If that question makes you pause, stay with us until the end. They once lived in a quiet suburb north of Austin, the kind of place where birds sang every morning and golden sunlight stretched across the lawn each afternoon. Their two-bedroom home, with its red tile roof and a tall maple tree in the backyard, was the result of nearly 8 years of saving and sacrifice. The husband worked as an engineer at a local appliance company, driving an old silver Toyota Camry. The wife stayed home with the kids and occasionally sold handmade scented candles through a small Etsy shop. Their two children attended a public school just a few blocks away, chattering excitedly every morning from the back seat of the car. From the outside, they didn't look poor. They had jobs, a home, and made regular mortgage payments, at least in the eyes of their neighbors. But inside that house was something no one could see. They were running hundreds of dollars short every month. Neither of them truly knew how much they were spending. They had 2 credit cards, a personal loan, and a few unpaid medical bills from the birth of their second child. Each seemed manageable until they added up. Dinner might look full: spaghetti, salad, a few meatballs. But in reality, those groceries were bought with reward points and end-of-month discounts from the local store. The laptop used for Etsy orders was so old it sometimes wouldn't turn on. Still, they tried to smile through it, because they believed it'll get better. They weren't reckless. They were simply unaware. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all. Like a boat that seems fine but has been leaking slowly for years, just waiting for one big wave to flip it over. In their case, that wave hadn't come yet, but the bottom was already damp. One evening, the husband stared at their credit card statement and realized the interest alone was eating up over $300 a month. The wife quietly admitted, "I can't even remember the last time we saved anything." It was a small sentence, but it hit hard, like the final drop that tips the glass. If there's a small lesson here, it's this: financial collapse doesn't happen overnight. It cracks slowly, and by the time you notice it, it's usually late. Their story didn't begin with a loud crash, no sudden bankruptcy. Just week by week, their account fell a little shorter. Month by month, the credit card balance crept higher, and day by day, their sense of stability quietly faded. But here's the beautiful part: when everything began to fall apart, they finally looked up and saw that they still had each other. And maybe, just maybe, all it takes is for one person to sit down, open a notebook, and start again. And surprisingly, that's exactly where their journey began. With something so simple, a small action that changed everything. That April, a short phone call changed everything. The husband had just come home from work, reaching for a glass of water when his phone rang. On the other end was the head of HR. The voice wasn't cold, but it was firm. "I'm sorry, but due to post-pandemic restructuring, the company has to make cuts." That was it. No warning, no severance. A position he had held for nearly 10 years, gone in less than 3 minutes. The days that followed were unusually quiet in their little home. Dinner was no longer filled with conversation, only the soft clinking of forks and knives on plates. The wife tried to increase candle sales online, But business dropped as the platform's algorithm shifted and old customers slowly disappeared. Within 3 months, they could barely afford groceries and gas. The mortgage was overdue. Credit card interest skyrocketed. Debt collectors began calling. One afternoon, while wiping down the kitchen counter, she noticed a letter taped to the front door, a foreclosure notice from the bank. It was the first time in their lives they truly felt there was nowhere left to return to. The house where their child had taken their first steps, where they had painted the living room together by hand, was no longer theirs. On moving day, the Austin sky was as gray and heavy as concrete. They packed only a few bags, a cardboard box of family photos, and a few blankets. No one spoke as they drove toward the outskirts, where the wife's sister offered them a small room to stay in temporarily. That room was barely 100 square feet, with dim yellow lighting, slightly damp walls, the smell of old wood, and a faint trace of candle wax left from her old shop. That night, the four of them lay together, 2 children between them, and no one could sleep. At that point, they had nothing left to lose. But in that very moment, something shifted. There was no more pride to protect, no more pretending everything was fine. They began to be honest, with each other and with their financial reality. The husband opened his laptop, trying to access their bank account, which now held only a few dozen dollars. The wife pulled out her old notebook and flipped through pages of past spending. And for the first time, they wrote it all down, every single debt, to the last dollar. The lesson here wasn't about losing a job or a house. It was this: many people only begin the journey to financial recovery when all the masks fall away. When there's no way out, we're finally forced to look directly at the numbers. And from what seemed like the darkest place, a small door quietly opened. A completely ordinary act, a pen, a notebook, a debt list, became the unexpected start of a journey they never saw coming. That was the moment when a new phrase began showing up in their search history: how to recover from financial collapse. That night, after a long day filled with tension and unspoken worries, they sat together under the soft yellow light of a single lamp in the small room they were staying in. The kids had fallen asleep. The air was still. The wife pulled out a worn blue notebook from the drawer, once used to jot down candle recipes, now repurposed to write something far more personal: numbers. Not business ideas, not dreams, just raw, honest numbers. When the husband walked in, he found her bent over the table, drawing thick red lines across each entry. No complaints, no sighs, just quiet determination. He sat down beside her, opened their old laptop, and began checking bank accounts, emails from lenders, credit card statements. For the first time, they faced everything. Not later, not tomorrow, but now. The final number was $67,200 in debt. They stared at it, and strangely, neither of them panicked. They felt lighter. For the first time in months, they knew exactly where they stood, and that, somehow, gave them hope. From that night on, they created a $0 budget. Every single dollar was assigned a job: groceries, bills, savings, debt payments. Nothing was left unaccounted for. The husband wrote out the budget and taped it to the fridge. The wife built a spreadsheet to track every expense. They celebrated saving $15 on meals. They felt proud canceling a streaming subscription they didn't need. These small wins became tiny anchors of stability. That weekend, while sorting through old books, they came across Rich Dad, Poor Dad, a gift from a friend years ago. Sitting on the floor mattress, they read a line that made them stop. Thoughts lead to feelings. Feelings lead to actions. Actions create results. That sentence hit home. Their problem wasn't just money. It was how they thought about money. Without changing that, even a bigger paycheck wouldn't save them from falling back into the same trap. For the first time, they stopped seeing money through guilt or fear and started seeing it with clarity. The book also taught them something they had never truly grasped before: the difference between an asset and a liability. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out, no matter how appealing it looks on the surface. So they set a new rule: before spending a single dollar, ask, is this an asset or a liability? This mindset shift transformed everything. When they bought a used printer to label candles, they called it an asset. It would help generate income. When friends invited them on a weekend trip, they gently declined, reminding each other This won't create cash flow. Not because they were stingy, but because they now knew what truly supported their long-term financial goals. And from that moment, the debt journey no longer felt like punishment. It became a path, one that led them out of the fog toward a future with clarity, intention, and direction. From the moment they decided to change, they didn't just live differently, they thought differently. Every dollar spent was now carefully considered, no longer based on impulse. Each week began with a quiet family meeting where the couple reviewed their budget, predicted upcoming expenses, and adjusted their debt payoff goals based on real numbers. The whiteboard on their wall no longer just tracked what they owed. It became a space filled with small photos of their children and little stickers they used to celebrate each time a payment was made. It wasn't just a debt journey anymore. It was a process of rebuilding trust with each other and with themselves. The husband continued driving for Uber every evening, sometimes even on weekends. Long drives through quiet neighborhoods, rainy nights with thunder overhead, they gave him time to reflect. Over time, he began to realize that each extra hour on the road wasn't just about earning money. It was a quiet promise to his family. The wife reopened her Etsy store, this time focusing on one single product, soy candles in simple jars, each with a handwritten label that read, "Small light, big hope." Surprisingly, those little messages began to sell, because everyone, it seemed, needed something to hold on to. They sold almost everything they didn't truly need, keeping only the essentials. No more Netflix, no more takeout. Clothes were washed and reworn, the kids' toys were gifts from friends. Each month that passed felt like a small victory. Some months, they paid off $800. Other months, only $200. But they never quit. Even when things got hard, like the night he had a minor accident while delivering food in the rain, or when her shop had to refund a big order due to a shipping error, they looked at the whiteboard where nearly half the original red numbers had been erased, and they pressed on. Slowly, concepts they had once read in books became part of their everyday life. When they bought a small rolling cart to help transport candle shipments, they called it an asset because it brought in income and reduced physical strain. When friends invited them on a weekend shopping spree for clearance deals, they looked at each other and repeated their rule: this won't create cash flow. They didn't say no because of guilt or fear, but because they knew exactly what served their greater goal. That mindset helped them stand strong against temptations, from the grocery store to social media, from flash sales to the classic "just this once." Discipline was no longer a burden. It became a habit that made their life lighter and more intentional. And the further they went, the more they realized financial recovery isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, a test of endurance, of knowing when to say no, and choosing to keep going even when you don't see results right away. When their debt dropped to just 4 digits, the husband said on a windy evening, "We used to think being debt-free was the finish line, but maybe it's just the starting point for a brand new life." That quote would later appear on one of his wife's new candle labels, because from now on, every light they lit would carry not just warmth, but discipline, and a quiet, unwavering belief in themselves. 28 months after the night they scribbled every debt into an old notebook, they stood in front of a small home on the outskirts of Austin, not to browse, but to sign the final papers. A simple house with off-white walls, a pale blue porch, and a freshly mowed lawn. No fancy upgrades, no backyard pool. But to them, it marked the beginning of something new. They paid nearly 70% in cash and covered the rest with a small assistance loan from the city. For the first time in years, they felt light. On the first morning in their new home, the husband brewed coffee as sunlight poured through the kitchen window. The kids ran around the yard with an old rubber ball they had brought from their rental. The wife opened a small wooden box and pulled out the photos they once taped on their whiteboard. The first one was after paying off a $412 dental bill. The last was taken the day they made their final debt payment, which happened to be their daughter's birthday. These photos, never framed or edited, carried a weight that words couldn't capture. They were reminders of quiet perseverance, of late-night sacrifices, of saying no when it was easier to give in. But what stayed with them the most wasn't the numbers paid off. It was the shift in how they understood money. Looking back, when asked what truly changed their lives, they said, "It wasn't the size of our debt that changed us. It was finally understanding how money works in our lives." They returned to a quote they had underlined in Rich Dad, Poor Dad: "Thoughts lead to feelings. Feelings lead to actions. Actions create results." Before, they let emotions drive their spending: fear, pressure, the need to feel better, even briefly. But now they let clarity lead the way. They moved from being a couple lost in financial confusion to people who knew how to make money serve their goals. Instead of letting it control their emotions, they continued using a $0 budget, not because they were still struggling, but because the system gave them peace. They still lived simply, still made conscious spending choices, but now it came from alignment, not deprivation. Every purchase was no longer about, can we afford this, but does this support the life we want to live? One afternoon, in their backyard, the husband planted a small maple tree beside an old swing, the same kind of tree they once had at their first house. When his wife asked why he chose it, he smiled and said, "Because it grows slow, but its roots go deep." That line would later become the perfect metaphor for their financial recovery. Not flashy, not fast, but strong, steady, and lasting. And that's when they realized this wasn't the end of the journey. Because when you finally walk without the weight of fear, that's when you begin to see the bigger paths waiting ahead. One early autumn evening, in a home that had finally started to feel like theirs, the family gathered around a rustic wooden table. The soft glow of a warm yellow light spilled gently across the wall. The wife placed a small homemade cake in front of her husband. No frosting, just a soft sponge and a few sweet and tart blueberries on top. Written in chocolate drizzle were the words, $0 debt, full heart life." They looked at each other and smiled, a real smile, not the kind that covers up exhaustion, but the kind that comes after a long journey, knowing you didn't give up. No words were needed. That one glance carried everything: gratitude, relief, and peace. What brought them here wasn't a high income or a stroke of luck. It was the choice to face reality, to start again from zero, and to stay consistent with the small things. A notebook, a whiteboard full of red numbers, nights spent driving mile after mile. All of it, each tiny decision, became the pieces of a financial recovery that was deeply human and incredibly real. If you're watching this video and feeling lost in your finances, remember this: no one is born knowing how to manage money. It's something you can learn, and you can start again at any time. If you saw yourself in their story, leave a comment that says, "Me too." Because maybe, just maybe, those two words will help someone out there feel a little less alone on their journey. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll be sharing more true stories, powerful lessons, and real ways you can begin walking your own path to financial freedom. Because sometimes all it takes is one honest story, told at the right time, to change the way you see money and yourself.